We now get around to the Hugos, the usually highly controversial but very entertaining surprise high point of the... for the Best Novel Award, the nominees are Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut Jr., Dune World by Frank Herbert, Glory Road by Robert A. Heinlein, Here Gather the Stars, which is also published as Waystation in hardcovers, by Clifford C. Mack, and Witch World by Andre Norton. The winner is Waystation by Clifford D. C. Mack. Maybe some of them will be controversial. For Best Short Fiction, the nominees are Code 3 by Rick Raphael, No Truce with Kings by Poul Anderson, A Rose for Ecclesiastes by Roger Zeleny, and Savage Pellucidar by Edgar Rice Burroughs. The winner is No Truce with Kings by Poul Anderson. Maybe all this talk about reforming the system is not so terribly necessary. I would also point out that in a peculiar sort of adjacent dimension, not attending this convention but in this hotel and very much among us, is the editor who published that story, Avram Davidson. For Best Professional Magazine, the nominees are Amazing Stories, Analog Science Fact Science Fiction, Galaxy Magazine, the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and Science Fantasy. The winner is Analog. Since we have no actual member of the magazine staff here to accept the award, it will be accepted by one of Analog's most impressive authors, Frank Herbert. Now, for Best Amateur Magazine, it says here very formally. I think most of us would think of it as Best Fanzine. The nominees are Amra, edited by George Scithers, Herbdom, edited by C. Casadesus Jr., Starspinkle, edited by Ron Elick and Bruce Peltz, and Yandro, edited by Robert and Juanita Colson. The winner is Amra. These are very nice givers of subsidiary awards we have. For Best Science Fiction Book Publisher, the nominees are Ace Books, Ballantine Books, Doubleday and Company, and Pyramid Books. The winner is Ace Books, edited by Donald Wallheim. is a wonderful night for old prose. This is something to warm the cockles. The award for Best Professional Artist, the nominees are Ed Emsch, Virgil Finlay, Frank Frazetta, Roy Krenkel, and John Schoenherr. The winner is Ed Emsch. As I say, a wonderful night for old prose, which brings us to our professional guests of honor. I have, in quite a number of years, spent in the, I suppose one says literary profession, anyway, the producing of words for entertainment. I've known 3 extraordinary marriages. People, couples, each of whom had more talent than any 2 people should have any right to. These were the Kuttners, Henry Kuttner and all of his various pseudonyms, and C.L. Moore. The Millars, Kenneth Millar, who's better known as Ross MacDonald, and his wife Margaret Millar, and the Hamiltons. I really do not know, in a way, how this thing works out. I mean, how a family, in its intimacy and domesticity, accommodates this kind of double creative talent. It's something that I think that the Institute of Personality Assessment in California should eventually take up in its studies in creativity. It has never worked in one of these marriages, and I think this deserves documentation for the future. I am told that the Hamiltons have decided by a tie vote of 1-1 that Miss Brackett will speak first. Leigh Brackett is an extraordinarily versatile creator. As you know, she is of importance not merely in our field. She has written extremely good suspense novels. She is one of only 3 women represented on James Sandoe's important critical checklist of the hard-boiled dick. It is a field in which women have almost always fallen flat on their faces. Miss Brackett has done very well indeed. She has also indeed written some good suspense novels that are not known as such. I think that before I die, I really should leave a document to be opened in 50 years for the benefit of future scholars so that they will know just who wrote what in the detective story. I know a great many secrets, and one of them is that one of Miss Brackett's best suspense novels is under another name. She has written westerns. She has received from the Western Writers of America the award equivalent to our Hugo. And as you know, she has written extremely well in at least 2 very different fields of science fiction. Just in case there are people who have not seen the latest issue of FNSF, I think there is a Brackett story I must tell. The first time I ever published a story of Leigh's, quite memorable story, I hope it will come to your memories, called The Tweener, a very sensitive example of what one might call the new realistic psychological science fiction. Very fine piece of work. And when I published that, I pointed out that Brackett was very distinguished both at this kind of thing and her early fame largely acquired on the pure romantic space opera, which nobody else has ever written with quite the same kind of touch. I said that she can write a story such as Purple Priestess of the Mad Moon, with such skill and style that even readers normally allergic to that kind of story will read it with enjoyment. This was, of course, purely a title that I invented at the moment I was writing the introduction. It sounded very much like a lot of Brackett titles. Our French edition, being a little literal-minded, took this over very seriously and announced Miss Brackett as the author of Traîtresse Pourpre de la Lune Fou. A great many Americans also picked this up as a perfectly serious bibliographical entry in the Brackett career. And people would say to her, you know, I've read all of your work, I thought, but where did Purple Priestess of the Mad Moon ever appear? It isn't in Day. Finally, this is an influence of the way in which fact eventually catches up with imagination. In the current issue of FNSF, you will find Purple Priestess of the Mad Moon by Leigh Brackett. You will also find a distinguished story by Mr. Hamilton in the same issue, Mr. Davidson having very wisely planned this as an issue to celebrate the guests of honor of the convention. So without more ado, we will start off on the Hamiltons with Miss Leigh Brackett.
Thank you all very much. And you'll probably hear this twice since there are two of us, but we are very, very happy and very proud to be here as guests of honor. And we want to thank all the members of the committee, particularly, who have been so wonderful to us. And we've had a marvelous time. And we are having a marvelous time. I want to say just a few words, if you'll forgive the paraphrasing, not about what I have done for science fiction, but what science fiction has done for me, and you'll pardon me, Corey, if I am repeating you there. I've often wondered just exactly what my life would have been like and what I would have been like if there hadn't been any science fiction. This is an interesting thought because when I was about 8, I began to read Edgar Rice Burroughs. I think some of you probably will have noticed some similarity in some of the Brackett stories. A debt I acknowledge with gratitude. And somehow something happened and a whole new horizon opened up. Now, I was a very active, healthy, non-introspective type of child. I was not the type to sit in a corner with a book and dream dreams, but somehow when I read these stories, it was a tremendously intense experience. And it remained with me, and became more and more the longer I went on, the more I read. So when I came to the point that I wanted to write, inevitably, I wanted to tell these gorgeous stories of travels in space and adventures on other worlds. And if there had not been this field to which I could go and from which I received all the marvelous pleasure and stimulation, I wonder what I would have filled the void. And I'm awfully happy that there was a science fiction. Because without it, everything would have been very different. And in particular, personally, and this too is saying something that Corey has just finished saying, science fiction has brought me personally so many things. The greatest day that any writer, and I think anybody who's ever managed to make it as a professional writer will know that this is so, the greatest day that you ever have, if you live to be 1,000 and you get 10 Nobel Prizes, is still the day upon which you sold your first story and you were actually a writer. no longer somebody who just said, well, I hope to be a writer, and I'm trying to write, but I'm actually a writer. I got a check, it's coming out in print, I'm a professional, I've made it, thank God. There's never anything like it. And I want to thank John Campbell and Astounding Stories for giving me this greatest day in my life. Science fiction has brought me friends, so many friends that if I named them all, we would be here until the middle of next week. People that I would never have met otherwise, and I'm sure this is an experience you've all had, because after all, we are a group which comes together periodically simply because first we came into it because we like science fiction and we want to meet with other lunatics who like science fiction, and we all talk the same language and we feel comfortable together. But after a while, the relationships become much more close than that, and these are your old and valued friends, and you'll travel clear across the country just to see them. And I think this is perfectly wonderful. And this was brought home to us this spring. We made our first trip to England, which was a lifelong dream of ours. And we went to the Eastercon in Peterborough and came in to the Bull Hotel in Peterborough, complete and total strangers. And suddenly, most warmly and gloriously, we were among friends, and we had a perfectly marvelous time. And this is a sort of thing, you know, that I don't think you could find anywhere in any other field. And science fiction has given me something else which is tremendously important to me, which is my husband, to whom I have been most happily married for almost 18 years now. And if it had been not for science fiction, I would not have met him, and I'm very happy I did. And also, it gave me a living. And this is an important thing, too. I mean, I know it's, you know, you're getting down into the nasty commercialism, and sometimes in the early days, I probably was overpaid at half a cent a word. But I did eat. And this is an extremely important thing. Tremendously important. But I have the most enormous gratitude to the whole field because it allowed me to do what I wanted to do, to fulfill a very great and happy thing within me, that I was able to write the stories and to sell them and to have people read them and like them. And tonight, right now, this minute, science fiction is making me feel that all of it has been most wonderfully worthwhile, and I thank you.
Trying to introduce Ed Hamilton to this audience is a little like trying to explain to you who John W. Campbell is. Ed goes back, as you all know, to the very early days of science fiction, and has the rather remarkable distinction, not at all common in people of that early era, that he has moved along with science fiction and has always written well the science fiction of the moment, that he has moved with developments, with changes in the field, with different approaches. Most of the great names of what we might call the Moscovitzian era are only names. I mean, many of them are still alive, but they are not important as contributing writers to the field at all any longer. Very rarely do you find it in another person here tonight, our recent Hugo winner, Clifford T. Simak, who also began in the very early days and has developed astonishingly. This ability to sense the creative nature of the field at any moment and move with it. Hamilton will always be remembered, especially for his bravura space operas. I mean, nobody has ever destroyed so many suns so well. He has also, in more recent years, however, done very sensitive, intelligent, small-scale things with a depth of human perception that science fiction now demands. And he can even occasionally, and has nicely done both at once, written bravura space opera actually with people in it. This is, I say, this is a great night for old prose, and this is the nth of the old pro, Ed Hamilton.
Begin my rather brief remarks, I want to set the record straight on something that Forrest has been telling you. He spoke grandly of the Boys Science Fiction Club of San Francisco. I would like to say that in 1929-30, I received many letters from the Boys Club of Boys Science Fiction Club of San Francisco. All letters came from Forrest Ackerman, the president, and Jim Nicholson, the secretary. Many years later, just a few years ago, Forrest took me around to see Jim Nicholson, whom I had never met, and who is now the head of American International Pictures. Of course, I'm glad to see a movie mogul and an old fan. There, those two men confessed their shame after 30 years. They were the Boys Club of Science Fiction. There were no others. Now, it's been difficult to think of anything to say to all these people. I can't very well talk about how to write science fiction looking some of the best science fiction writers in the country in the face. If I talk about the history of science fiction, Sam Moskowitz will jump up and prove that I'm wrong. So many good critics and editors have commented on the nature of science fiction that I hardly like to add my own conception of it, but I have a chance now to do so, so I'm going to put it on you very briefly before going on to the only thing I have to say, which is sort of the long life of the long work of science fiction prose. The nature and science and significance of science fiction have been gone into it deeply. But before I speak a little on something else, I want to say what makes some people like science fiction while others don't. You all must have friends, good friends with good minds, good imaginations. You've tried to interest them in science fiction. They won't take it. They don't like it. Now, what is the difference? I don't believe that it's a quality of imagination. I don't believe, certainly, that it's an interest in history or in science. I think the difference is that they want to go further in the installment of the story, and let me explain that reference. It's always seemed to me that when we're born into this world, we become part of a great serial story that has been running for ages. The time that we live, the scriptural 70 years, is our installment of this human story. Now, we can go through our own part of the story without ever knowing or caring how the tale began, and we will be perhaps none the worse for it. But most of us, when we read a magazine serial installment, would like to go back to the story thus far, to find out how the story began. Just as in the case of the magazine serial, I think that history and archaeology are the story thus far of the human story. But we're only living one installment of it, and some of us want to know how the story is going to go on from there. And the only way you can do that is by a series of calculated guesses, scientific extrapolation, and just a little dreaming to try and visualize what the rest of the story will be. Let me change my metaphor. I think that we are as locked into a cell. We can't go into the future. There's no door into it. But so we try to construct windows. And these windows are more or less colored by the temperament of those science fictionists who create them, and by their knowledge. Some of us make damn lurid windows and a damn lurid future, of which I have been guilty, I'll admit it. Others do remarkably sharp, clear work that gives beautiful vision. But this, to me, is science fiction, a window in the future. Now, before I go on, I want to say that the life of a professional, which is the only thing I have to offer that might be new to you, working for almost 40 years, has taught me at least a few little things. And I would like to pass on a few of those little things to beginning writers who would like to be long-time pros. I want to tell them what they're going to have to undergo, besides you. And one of the first things I want to say is don't be impatient. Don't be impatient to hear about your stories. I've heard writers complain to me quite recently that they had to wait weeks to hear about a story. Back in the old days when that wonderful gentleman, Dr. Sloan, edited amazing stories, I sent him a story that he kept for 4 weeks. Then he kept it for 4 months. Finally, after 5 months, he bought it. Then I waited for it to be published because he would not pay except on publication. I waited a year. I waited 2 years. I waited 2 years and 2 months. And then I got tired of waiting. And so I wrote and asked, will you send me the story back? It's obvious you're not going to publish it. And he wrote back a letter which began, don't be hasty. There was another publishing house who published science fiction, which I shall not name, who were wonderful people, but they almost never paid, not on publication or long after. And I want to say as a rule to try and get payment in a friendly manner if you have to do it. And so in the black year of 1933, I went into their office, asked for payment and so on, was received friendlily, but the bookkeeper was out. It was impossible to pay me. But the bookkeeper would return. So I sat and waited. For 4 long hours of summer afternoon I waited, petting the office cat. At the end of that time, they became sick of my face and finally paid me. And I had got my money and I had made a friend. The cat wanted to go home with me. Sometimes, though, a publisher has a good reason for delaying payment. And I got one of the best I ever had from a publisher in India. He published an English language newspaper in India. He wanted to serialize a story of mine. And so I said, yes, okay. And then he wrote back apologetically and said, business is very bad here while the monsoon is blowing. When the monsoon stops, business will get better, and then I will pay you. Now, there you have a reasonable excuse. And I think the monsoon is blowing yet. It's been about 10 years. Don't take it badly when you get editorial snubs. I got the ne plus ultra of those ones. It was when I was writing Captain Future. They had started, the magazine publishers had started a little outfit called The Futureman. It's one of those things you give the kid a badge and a card and so on, and then he will love the future. The Future magazine. And it occurred to me after I'd written some 10 of those novels that I had never seen the card and a badge. And I wrote back to Morton, was the editor then, why don't I get a card and a badge? And he wrote back, he said, your last story was 1 week late. You have been blackballed. Another thing I've had to undergo that writers more scientifically talented than I have not had to undergo is criticism of science at times. And I think it best to squelch such critics. And I never thought up the classic squelch myself, but I heard it once by my old friend E. Hoffman Price, who was co-author of a long science fiction serial in Argosy magazine called Sapiens of Saturn. A reader wrote into the magazine complaining about the science. Said that in the story they threw a body out of the spaceship. The body fell to Saturn. He said by all the laws of gravity, the body would have followed the ship. And how did Mr. Price explain that? The editor asked him to explain it. He wrote back instantly. He said the explanation is quite simple. The last time I was out by Saturn and we threw a body out of the spaceship, it went to Saturn. It didn't. I hate to mention this, but sometimes your fellow writers will sneer at you as well as editors. And this happened to me once. It was jealousy, I know it was. I wrote, as Tony and other people have mentioned, a great many stories which had to do with the imminent destruction of the world, but very often the world was saved by the hero reaching a switch and pulling it, stopping the machine, and the world was saved. In 1939 at the World's Fair, I was going with some fellow writers through the grounds, and we came to the Westinghouse Electric Building, and on the side of it, as a display, they had a switch some 60 feet tall. And innocently, without even taking any communication between themselves, like Eric Frank Russell, Otis Klein, Jack Williamson, and Otto Binder, and Mark Weisinger, lined up and said, "We salute the switch to save the world." I want to say, in relation of a writer to his readers, the writer should always be very courteous to them. And if they want something from you that you can give them, give it to them. I once wrote, not too many years ago, a story in which a man's mind goes into the future, 1,000,000 years, takes up residence in another man's body, becomes the captain of a war of giant space fleets in which not only the whole world, but part of space itself is destroyed. I received a letter from a nice youngster in Oregon. He asked me, would I give them the permission to make that their senior high school play. I gave it, and I wish I could have seen it. And if a fan gets unpleasant in another way, why, ignore it. Now, a fan who is now famous, but not in our field, and whose name I will not give, wrote me once a most endearing letter. It began like this: I want you to do an article for my fan magazine. I feel justified in taking up your time this way because you have taken up so much of my time reading your lousy stories. I was so impressed, I wrote him the article. And finally, never resent fair criticism. I received a few years ago a letter which I showed Leigh. It was from, I think, a quite youthful fan who was quite enthusiastic about some of my stories, and he concluded his rhapsody by saying there should be a statue of gold wreathed in roses of you in every city of the world. And I told my wife, that's all I ask. Fair, honest criticism. Forgive one more of these too many personal reminiscences, and this one quite serious, not for fun. January 1926 seems a long time ago. It was on a day in that month that I sold my first story, the thrill with which Leigh is well described. I well remember that I thought, oh, what a wonderful it would be to go through life writing these tales of pseudoscience, as we called them in those days, I think. But the whole thing seemed too impossible. There were no science fiction magazines. And I didn't even know that there was going to be one. My story had been sold to Weird Tales. Had I thought that many years later I would be on the other side of the country speaking to a large group of people who gathered in a common interest in science fiction, this would have seemed more fantastic to me than any story I could write. But it has happened, and for this I'm indebted to everybody in science fiction. Now, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Leigh, and may you always flourish. I don't know how I happened in introducing Ed to overlook Captain Future, because this is something that is so dear to us of this generation. These were stories that had a wonderful sense of storytelling and a sense of pure fun of adventure that we have, at times, I think, in many improvements in modern science fiction, tended to lose. But you do... I think for pure relish of Captain Future, you need years and perspective. I refer you to the foremost Captain Future fan in the room, Astrid Anderson. That is all of the formal program of the banquet. There will be a couple of announcements from Mr. Stark, and then go out and find yourselves a good party, and I hope I'll see you there.
Remember the London party in 208 and 209, Wally Weber and Arthur Thompson are taking memberships. And also, Steve Tolliver and Rick Sneary will be taking memberships for the Long Beach Convention. Next year's Worldcon. The program is adjourned.
Man, where's your badge? You're not supposed to be here. Of course. Amra, I'm good. That's cool. I'll let you get by with it. I presume.